through the ages. Jesus calls us to get out of the boat and walk with him on the water. This is Pastor Andy Morgan here at Bald Eagle State Park, and today we hear this story from Matthew chapter 14. After feeding the 5,000, Jesus told his disciples to get into a boat and go ahead of him to the other side, while he went off to spend some time alone with God. Even Jesus needed some rest and reflection. As night fell, the winds stirred and the waves grew fierce. It was then, in the midst of the storm, that the disciples saw something extraordinary, a figure walking toward them on the water. Terrified, they thought it was a ghost, but Jesus called out to them, "Take courage, it's I. Don't be afraid." Peter, eager to respond to the Lord, said, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus simply replied, "Come." So Peter stepped out of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind and the waves, fear took hold of him and he began to sink. He cried out to Jesus, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him, saying, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" While Peter's faith wavered a bit, it was also strong enough to help him get out of the boat and walk on the water with Jesus. This moment teaches us that Jesus not only invites us to step out in faith so that we can walk with him, but that he will be there to help us when doubt and fear creep in. The invitation to walk on water is not just about walking with Jesus in new and different ways. It's also about trusting him when life gets hard and uncertain. Today, can we step out of the safety of our boats and walk on the water with Jesus? Can we trust him to catch us when we begin to fall? Thank you for joining me at the lake. Let's keep walking with Jesus together. So we've been in this series, so there's obviously a water theme, wade in the water, standing on the promises, even on the water. We've been in this series of looking at the stories of Jesus at the lake. Last week we looked at one of the stories of Jesus on the lake, literally in a boat with his disciples. Today we're going to look at the other story of Jesus on the lake. Last week, Jesus led the disciples onto the boat, headed into the storm. This week, Jesus sends the disciples onto a boat. He's going to go off and pray, and he sends the boat on its way. Jesus has just done this miraculous feeding of 5,000, and he sends the disciples home, and he's going to go and get some rest. He's going to go and reflect and pray. And as evening comes, or at some point during the evening, Jesus knows a storm has come up. The winds have picked up. Whether he could see or whether he just knew that the disciples in the boat were having trouble, we don't know, but he knew that they were in trouble. He knew that they were struggling against the wind, that things weren't going well for them, and they were far from land, and they were actually headed into the deepest part of the sea. We believe that the disciples may have been drifting in this area of the lake. And so again, if you remember, this is Lake Gennesaret, also known as the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum is in this area where Jesus did most of his ministry. It's believed that Jesus fed the 5,000 in this area. And so he had them get on a boat and they were headed back this way, but the winds were against them. So they were probably struggling in this area and maybe blown off course a bit. And so there are many people who believe that they were in this general area of the Lake Gennesaret, the Sea of Galilee. What's important to know is that that is the deepest part of the lake. As the deepest part of the lake, they believed at some point in time, this idea, this tradition came up that there is a portal in this area, and from this portal to the underworld, ghosts and demons would emerge. This is where they would come from to torment those caught in storms on the water. And so we believe that they're drifting into this area. So when Jesus walks to them on the water, and the disciples are in this boat and in this area, and they see this image coming to them, they just assume that it's a ghost or it's a demon, it's someone coming to harm them, because who else could it have been? They would not thinking that it was actually Jesus. They hadn't seen Jesus walk on the water. How could it have been Jesus? And they were in an area where they believed ghosts and demons came up, and so they are terrified when they see this image approach them on the water. It's understandable that they would be afraid and cry out in fear. And so Jesus very quickly wants to reassure them. He says, "Take courage. It's me, it's I. Don't be afraid." In the middle of the storm, in the middle of the night, in the middle of their fear, Jesus walks on water to be with the disciples, to encourage them, to give them strength, to alleviate their fear. In the middle of the dark, in the middle of our storms, in the middle of fearful and anxious times that we go through, Jesus is still willing to walk on water, to come and be with us, to encourage us, to take away our fear. I think Jesus still comes to us in those moments of chaos and confusion, and he says, "Look, don't be afraid. Take courage. It's me. I'm with you. And if I'm with you, there's no need to fear." The story of Jesus is a picture of who God is, of who God has always been. We can go back into the Old Testament and see pictures of God coming to help his people, literally walking on water, moving heaven and earth to come and be with his people. One of the most powerful passages for me comes from Psalm 18. It's a lengthy passage, but it's meaningful to me because at a point in my life where I felt like I was in the dark and in the storm and facing a lot of fear, Jesus came to me. And when I recognized that presence, I was led literally, not one of those things that I recommend, but, I got one of those little Gideon Bibles and I opened it up and I read this psalm and I'm like, this is my story. Like, this is my life. This is what has just happened to me. And so Psalm 18 has always been powerful for me, but it gives us a picture of who God is and how God is willing to go to great lengths to come and be with us. So from Psalm 18, it says, "In my distress, in the storm, I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. And from his temple, he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. The earth trembled and quaked, and the foundations of the mountains shook. They trembled because he, God, was angry, and smoke rose from his nostrils, and consuming fire came from his mouth. Burning coals blazed out of it, and he parted the heavens, and he came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his covering, his canopy around him, the dark rain clouds of the sky. And out of the brightness of his presence, clouds advanced with hailstones and bolts of lightning. The Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded. He shot his arrows and he scattered the enemy. With great bolts of lightning, he routed them. The valleys of the sea were exposed, and the foundations of the earth laid bare at your rebuke, Lord, at the blast of breath from your nostrils. And he reached down from on high, and he took hold of me. He drew me out of my deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemy, from my foes who were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my disaster, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out into a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me. I love this passage from Psalm 18. My paraphrase of that long verse is simply this: God moves heaven and earth to come and be with us, to come and rescue us. And isn't the imagery of this what we see Jesus doing? He comes in the midst of the storm and he reaches out to help them. And he draws them, as we'll see, he draws them out of many waters. That's what Jesus did for his disciples. He walked on the water to be with them in the storm. And that's what he's willing to do for us today. God's willing to go to any length necessary to be with us in the storm. We aren't in the storm alone. We aren't in the dark alone. We aren't in our fear alone. God is with us. If we think that somehow our sin and our failure has kept God away, we need to understand that no matter what darkness we may be experiencing, this dark night, maybe a dark night of our own soul, because we're feeling so overcome by ourselves, God comes to be with us. And Jesus is always willing to come in the midst of the storm. One of the reasons he comes in the storm is, as we heard last week, he's not afraid of the storm. Last week we heard Jesus was asleep in the boat because he wasn't afraid of the storm that was raging around them. The disciples were afraid. They feared for their lives. They wake Jesus up saying, "Help us, save us, rescue us." Jesus isn't afraid. Why? Because he knows he has power over the storm. Jesus isn't afraid of this storm. It's blowing the disciples all around. They can't get to the shore. They're not able to go where they want to go, but Jesus isn't afraid. Why? Because he can walk on water. He can walk through the storm. Again, he has power over the storm. The storm never gets the final word in our lives. If we're going through a storm right now, it never gets the final word. Jesus gets the final word. And Jesus says, look, I have power over this storm. And I can give you peace in the midst of the storm. And so one of the final words of Jesus when we're going through a storm is simply, do not be afraid. It's I'm with you. Take courage. I can only imagine the kind of fear and awe that the disciples must have had when they're in the storm and they finally recognize or think they recognize that it's Jesus who's coming to them. When they find out it's Jesus, a normal response might be, quick, Jesus, get in the boat. Like, what are you doing on the water? Come and get in the boat. Like, come in where it's safe. That might be the response a normal person would have. Simon was not a normal person. Simon was always willing to be out on the fringes a little bit. And so Simon doesn't do what we expect and invite Jesus into the boat. No, Simon says, if it's you, Jesus, let me come to you on the water. Kind of a crazy, an amazing request of Simon. But you see, Simon is so sure that it's Jesus that he's willing to get out of the boat if Jesus says, come. And so we know the story. Jesus says, come, and Simon gets out of the boat. He wants to be where Jesus is. He wants to be where the power of God is. He wants to be where the action is. And so he sees Jesus there, and he gets out of the boat. Do we want to be where Jesus is? Do we want to be where the action is? Do we want to be where the power of God is? Because most of the time, it's not in the boat, but it's outside the boat. And so are we willing to get out of the boat and go be with Jesus? Here, the boat is a symbol of what's safe, what's secure, where we kind of feel like we should stay, not in the midst of a storm, but at all times. It's comfortable. And yet, if we want to be where Jesus is, if we want to be doing what God's doing, if we want to be where the action is, we have to get out of the boat. We have to move beyond what is comfortable. You know, too often what we want to do is we want to play it safe. We'll step out, in our faith a little bit. We attend worship We make that a priority. Maybe we go to a Sunday school class or a small group or a Bible study, relatively safe. We're willing to engage our faith when it's safe. But many times, playing it safe means we're not really where Jesus is, and we're not experiencing the power of God. And so are we willing to get out of the boat? Like the 11 disciples, too often we just want to stay put. We don't want to take the risks. But to be part of the work of Jesus, we want to be part of a miraculous, powerful moment. We have to go where Jesus is. So let's think about where Jesus is today. First and foremost, Jesus is here. When two or more are gathered in worship, when two or more are gathered, Jesus, is in the midst of them. So let's be clear, Jesus is here, and he's with us. Hopefully he is the focus of our worship. We lift our eyes to him, we lift our hearts to him. He's here. But I don't think Jesus is just sitting in the pew next to us or standing during the hymns and not singing, which some of us do. I don't think that's what Jesus is doing. First of all, I think Jesus is engaged. I think he's singing at the top of his lungs. Whether he has a good voice or not, we don't know. He was perfect, so maybe he had perfect pitch and could sing beautifully. But he was also human, and many of us don't have great voices. But I think he was engaged. I think he was in worship to love God with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength, to give himself in any and every way he could. I think he was in worship, but he is engaging God the Father in worship. When we gather, are we coming to engage God the Father? Are we willing to come and in times of worship give our heart, soul, mind, and strength? Are we coming willing to sing at the top of our lungs, to pray at the depths of our heart, to listen with a heart open to hear what God has to say? Sometimes that means getting out of the boat. It means taking a risk. Am I really willing to open myself up? Am I willing to sing even though the people around me may wish that I would be quiet? Well, who cares about the people around you? Because they're going to be singing so loud they're not going to hear you. So it's all okay. Are we willing to engage? Get out of what's comfortable even in times of worship. Jesus is here. So I think Jesus is not just in worship. I don't think he's content to just sit in the pew and engage for the service. I think he's also standing at the door, welcoming people in. I think Jesus is playing the bells, singing in the choir, offering whatever gifts he has. I think Jesus is willing to go sit with the children in the nursery, teach the kids in Sunday school and children's church. I think Jesus is saying, hey, I don't know technology, but I'm going to go back into the broadcast room and do what I can so that this message can get out to those who need to hear it. I think Jesus is saying, when I gather for worship, I'm going to do everything I can to encourage the body of Christ, to welcome the community in. I don't think Jesus would be content to just come and sit and play it safe and stay in the boat. I think Jesus would be willing to get out of the boat. What can I do? It may be uncomfortable. I might not feel the most gifted or the most talented or the best able, qualified person to do this, but I'm going to take a risk. And I'm going to get out and do what God is calling me to do. Can we get out of the boat, move beyond what is comfortable, and walk on the water with Jesus? I think Jesus is reaching out to our community. finding ways to connect with people, to love them. Right before Jesus walked on the water, called Peter out of the boat, Jesus had fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. He was feeding people. He was meeting their needs. He was taking care of them. We have opportunities through the life of the church to feed people physically, spiritually. You heard about the opportunities to come and help with the football dinners in the 5th quarter. These are wonderful opportunities to feed people, to work together. I know sometimes it's uncomfortable. You don't know who you're going to be working with. You don't know all the people there. Trust me, they'd be thrilled to have you come and be a part of feeding people, offering hospitality, letting the community get a taste, pun intended, get a taste of who we are. Feeding kids at the 5th quarter. And I'm telling you, if you come on certain Friday nights, you can be part of a miracle. Because when we do our turkey dinners, particularly the first one of the season, whatever reason, Bellefonte loves turkey. And we get hundreds of people. And we're sometimes in the back praying, God, we need more turkey. Can you make this stretch? We need more stuffing. Can you make it stretch? We're praying that we have enough to feed all the people who show up. You want to be part of a miracle? Be part of a turkey dinner, a 5th quarter. And Jesus, yes, he is out in the community serving people. As Jeff said, he's caring for those in need, offering food and water to those who have none. You can meet Jesus through missions and outreach of the church. We'll be doing a fall mission week, but there are opportunities to be involved in mission through our toolbox ministry every week. You have some time to spend, you have some hours to give, you just have a set of hands to offer. They can put you to use. And sometimes as we are helping people, we see Jesus. There are God moments that only God can provide. You can get involved in places like the food bank, the Faith Center. But when we're willing to step out and serve in ways that might make us uncomfortable, we will experience the power of God. I still remember the first mission trip I went on. I was a new pastor in Altoona, and there had been some flooding in North Carolina, and I just felt the call to go on a mission trip. And our church wasn't going, but there was another church in the community, and so I took a deep breath, and I signed up to go with that church. I didn't know anyone. It was outside of my comfort zone. I was going to go spend a week with people I didn't know, and I traveled down, and I spent a week serving in eastern North Carolina. And it was a little bit like getting out of the boat, walking on water. And then while we were there, most of you know, I'm not real handy with tools. I can paint, so that's about it. But we were ripping out a floor that unfortunately, had been flooded out, and we had to tear it out. And so I'm using some tools that I didn't know how to use, trying to tear out a floor. And I'm not kidding you, it was retired women who came to me and said, Andy, you're doing it wrong. You do it like this. Okay, a little embarrassing, a little out of my comfort zone, but you know what? It was great. And we all laughed about it, and then I learned, okay, this is how you use the crowbar. Okay. It was a moving experience. I could see Jesus in the people we were helping. I could see Jesus in the people who were helping me. It was uncomfortable. It wasn't my comfort zone. Those things are a little bit outside of that for me. But I said, I know I'm going to get out of the boat and I'm going to walk on the water. And I got to experience the power of God because of it. You don't have to go on a mission trip. You can get involved right here. You can see someone in need. You can work and serve through the church. But are we willing to go where the action is? Are we willing to go where Jesus is? Think to yourself. Say, God, the prayer that Jeff had us pray, show us where you are so that we can join you in what you're doing, because that's where the action is. That's where the power is. That's where the miracles take place. So help us get out of the boat. Find something that will push you and challenge you. Find something that you want to do or that you feel called to do that will make you have to trust Jesus. You can't trust yourself. You can't trust your own strength. This is beyond what I have. That's what Peter had to do. It was beyond what I can do to walk on water, but that's what Peter was willing to do. When Simon got out of the boat and started to walk on the water, you might think that the greatest doubts and fear would be stepping out of the boat. Like, can I really even just stand on the water with Jesus? When I was on the Sea of Galilee, there's a picture of the boat that I was in, and this was the water. This is why I could do a boat trip on the Sea of Galilee. Look how calm it is. Not a lot of waves. And there was no peanut butter and jelly, so I was good. But that's how calm it was. And I took this particular picture because I stood there and I thought, Peter got out of the boat and walked on water. And I felt like I had that kind of faith. I was like, I wonder what would happen if I swung my leg over and tried to stand on the water. And I thought about it because I felt like I had that much faith. And to me, that for Peter, that would have been the biggest step. Like to just get out and stand on the water would. And then I realized, well, wait a minute. Jesus is not out there calling me, so I better not do it. So I did not. But for me, that would have been the biggest hurdle, the biggest step. The one that required so much faith to just get out of the boat. Peter or Simon, he got out of the boat and he just started walking on the water. It's like there's no question about it. He just gets out and starts walking on the water with Jesus. The doubts and the fear didn't come until a little bit later on. I don't know what was going through Simon's mind where he's like, wait a minute. I can't do this. It says, he fell to the wind, saw the waves. He was already walking on the water. He was doing it, but then he lost sight of Jesus. He was looking at his surroundings, maybe thinking about himself. I can't do this. And that's when he started to sink. And in his fear, he cried out to Jesus, Lord, save me. And just as we heard in Psalm 18, Jesus reached down. We don't know how fast he sank, but Jesus reached down and pulled him up. Got him safely back into the boat. Whether it's a totally calm day, whether it's in the middle of the storm, the reality is if it's not Jesus who's calling us, and if we take our eyes off of Jesus, we're going to fail. We're going to sink. And sometimes when we step out in faith, when we hear the call of God and we step out in faith, sometimes we fall. Sometimes we falter. Sometimes we end up doing something and we're like, this is beyond what's comfortable for me. And we tap into that fear. And if we say, God, save me, Jesus, help me, he'll be there. He gives us the strength and the power to move forward. It's when we focus on the problems. It's when we focus on ourselves. It's when we look at what we're doing and we think, wait, I can't do this. When Jesus is like, right, you can't do this. But with me, through me, in my power, you can do this. Don't look at yourself. Don't look at the problems. Look at me. And if we can keep looking at Jesus, we're going to find ourselves doing things we never thought possible. Maybe things we never imagined. Things won't always go that well when we walk on the water. But if we start to sink, Jesus will pull us up. I think Jesus would rather save us on the water than watch us in the safety of the boat. Jesus would rather save us on the water than just watch us live in the safety of the boat. Jesus did say to Simon, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" I don't think it was a rebuke as much as some encouragement, like, "Oh, Peter, you were doing it. You were doing it. Why did you doubt? Why did you take your eyes off of me?" It doesn't record what Jesus said to the other disciples. I'm wondering if Jesus said to them, "You have no faith. Why didn't you even try? Why didn't you even get out of the boat? You saw Peter walking on the water. Why didn't you even try?" I think Jesus would rather save us on the water than watch us live our lives in the safety of the boat. Are we willing to take some chances, take some risks? While I was serving as a pastor in Altoona, we were trying to do some new things. We were taking some risks. We had started an after-school program when none of us knew anything about after-school programs, but kids were coming and we felt God calling us out there, so we did that. We were changing some of our worship. We were trying to engage younger people, so we were doing more modern things in worship, and a lot of people really didn't like that, and they thought, this is the end of the church. We're going to shut our doors in a couple of weeks. Everything's falling apart. And I remember sitting in a council meeting, and there was some conversation about all of this, and a man kind of silenced everyone and said, I'd rather go out on a limb and have it fall underneath us than to say we never even tried. And I thought of that. And I said, I'd rather go out on a limb doing what we think God is asking us to do and fail and falter than to never even try to do anything. I think of that because today in Altoona, in this area of Altoona, a lot of the churches that didn't try anything, they're closed now. Second Avenue is still open. There's still an after-school program going. They're still doing worship, engaging all kinds of people, and they have a vital ministry in their neighborhood. And it's because people were willing to take some risk and get out of the boat and try some things and fail in some ways, but succeed in some ways. And we walked with Jesus on the water and we experienced the reward. This story is an invitation for us to be like Peter, to be like Simon, to get out of the boat. He was the only one who was willing to get out. It's a few chapters later that Jesus looks at Simon and he says, I think he sees Simon's risk-taking, his daring, his courage, his faith. And he says to Simon, on the kind of faith you have, I'm going to build my church. And that's when it's after he's walked on water that Jesus gives Simon the name Peter, which means rock, foundation. And I think the message to us as the church today is that the kind of faith that we need to have is a risk-taking faith. I think that's the kind of faith this church has. We take some risks. We'll try some things. We move out on the limb because we feel God calling us. We're willing to get out of the boat and walk on water. And we have the reward of walking with Jesus. We just got to keep it going. Keep finding ways to not play it safe and not be comfortable, and encourage and invite the church, all of us, to get out of the boat. This is an invitation for us to get out of the boat. Be where the action is. Let's go walk on the water with Jesus. Let's do what Jesus is doing. Let's be where he is. Let's do the things that at first seem impossible, but in time just becomes the new norm of our lives. So how is Jesus today calling you to get out of the boat? Where is Jesus inviting you to walk on the water with him? Not, hey, go walk on the water over there all by yourself, but hey, come with me and let's walk on the water here. Can you take a small step? Can you just try and get out of the boat? Can you do one thing that will challenge you and push you? Is there something you said, I would do this, but I don't think I can. Maybe that's exactly what Jesus is saying. Right, you can't, but with me you can. So do it. Get out of the boat. Come. Trust me. When I look at this story and this invitation, what an amazing thing that Jesus calls us to be part of what he's doing. What a gift that if we will take some risks, we will be rewarded with seeing the power of God at work in our world. Jesus didn't have to call Peter out. Peter could have said, Jesus, if it's you, let me come to you. And Jesus had been like, no way, Peter, let me get in the boat first. Let me come to you. It is amazing to me that the God of the universe wants us to be engaged and involved, that he wants us to be where he is, doing what he's doing, engaged in ways that he's engaged. Even if we stumble, even if we falter, even if we fall, he'll be there to rescue us. He'll be there to pick us up. But he's like, you know what? It's on that kind of faith, that kind of powerful faith that I can build the church. And we can make a powerful influence and we can make a mark in the world. What I love about Faith Church is that we have a history of that kind of faith. Stepping out in new ways, doing new things, saying, if God's not a part of this, it's going to fall apart. But we know God's a part of it. And so we're going to get out of the boat. Collectively, the church can't have that kind of faith unless you and I and the people next to you and all of us have that kind of faith. We're the church. So can we have that kind of faith? Can we get out of the boat and walk on the water with Jesus? Let's pray that we can.